This is episode 4, Building a Franchise Brand with Ty McBride, Preservan. And guys, this is all about the economics of franchising, the financial truths of franchising. We're going to go into detail. Ty, for sure, this is a journey. Episode 4, I mean, you've lived this as you're building Preservan. Where do we start? Franchisor, franchisee, economics of franchising, financial truths of franchising. What do you say?
Well, what I guess what I first say is, what do they say, that everything takes twice as long as you plan and costs twice as much money. Is that what people say? No, man, great startup question. I would say that you first have to start, for us, you got to start with the franchisee, or with just kind of understanding, because you talk about this a lot, like unit level economics. To understand how you're going to make this make sense as a business, the business of being a franchisor, well, you got to start with the unit economics of your franchisee, because ultimately, however your model is designed, their success is going to directly impact whether or not you can be successful financially. And so you really have to start with at the franchisee level.
And it's not counterintuitive, but so many franchisors out there, they get the engineering wrong. Mm-hmm. They start with the franchisor economics and trickle down to the unit economics of franchisees. And so much is aligned there. So the other thing too is, when we look at brand story, how your brand is positioned, in many ways, your brand story is an economic story, mm-hmm. which is the unit economics of the franchisee. So Ty, Preservan, how do you view your unit economic model? What is the model for Preservan from an economic standpoint, and what can that mean for your franchise buyers, your franchisees?
Yeah. So at least when we were putting this together, and as we continue to grow it, we first, we talk about unit economics, and it's always like, it's a big word, but what I tried to drive that down to in thinking about this was, like, at the franchisee level, what are the unit economics? What are the things that are going to drive that business? Because driving their business ultimately drives the top business, the franchisor. And so it came down to, for us and ours, right, it's going to be your average job, the number of jobs that an individual can do, and kind of thinking about, this is something that lots of home service people talk about, but like average revenue per person. And so really thinking about, okay, because you're thinking about payroll, and then you got vehicles in a home service business, a mobile home service business. So we started out with, like, we got to get jobs, and then those jobs need to have an average ticket of this, and then a technician or a person needs to be able to do so many jobs inside of this unit, which ultimately became the vehicle, right? For our model and many other home service models. And so when we started to map out the financial viability of being a franchisor, we didn't think about number of franchisees. We thought about number of vehicles. Like, we thought, we've got to have this many vehicles on the road. This is how many vehicles we have to have on the road. That many vehicles will purchase this much product, will generate this much royalty. That's kind of how we had to build that model. So starting with, how do we get franchisees to get the right number of jobs, to make sure those jobs are the right average ticket, to make sure that their revenue, we call it revenue per hour, but just their per hour rates were where they needed to be. And then that would then allow them to buy vehicles and support vehicles. And then how many of those vehicles did we need to have when we opened, and kind of growth, and in each territory, and just to map that whole thing out to make sure we had a financially viable business as being a franchisor, or at least know where we would be financially viable.
I mean, there's good insights. So many times franchisors are focused on, I need to sell more franchises, right? And versus, I need to better engineer the economic performance of our franchisees,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Ty, when you look at the economic model of franchising, now from you at a franchisor perspective, mm-hmm. if you could share, so when you think back to your perception of franchising before you franchised to where you are now, building a service-based franchise organization, at the franchisor level, how has your understanding of the economics of franchising changed, and what do you value as a franchisor as you build Preservan?
So definitely when I first started thinking about franchising, the information that you can kind of get from the internet is, and rightfully so, a lot of it's on just acquiring new franchisees. And that can seem very appealing, especially when you start to look at, you kind of do some comps of other FDDs and you start to understand what people are charging for initial franchise fees and then multi-unit. You could go like, wow, this is $50,000, $80,000, $100,000. And you can see why there's so many people that want to like go for that. Like, and fair enough. Like, I think I was there too. You start thinking about, well, it's all about the number of franchisees I'm going to bring on. As we started to do pro formas and kind of model this and learn about the industry, what we realize is that that's not really what we need to focus on. Yeah, you want to acquire new franchises, but you only want to acquire new franchises so they can generate revenue and you can acquire the royalties from their strong performance. So you have to kind of flip this mindset of, and even though we've made some mistakes in awarding franchises in the last 3 years, because switching that mindset, because so now, as we're evaluating candidates, we're not evaluating whether or not somebody can pay an initial franchise fee. That was mistakes that we made early on where, you kind of look at it like that. Now we're evaluating, is this person have the capital and capacity to build a business that's going to generate the amount of revenue that we have an expectation of each and every one of our territories? And are they going to be able to get profitable in that? Are they the right person to run a profitable business? Because we know they can't reinvest in their business and grow it unless they're profitable. And so we're evaluating people a lot differently than I evaluated people 3 years ago, because it's just a whole different conversation. And for people listening, hindsight, I probably would do it. It's hard to go back and say I would do it differently. I probably wouldn't, because everybody's been where I'm at some point in time in franchising. But you don't have to wait as long or go through all the hard knocks that I went through to figure it out. It's just, you want to begin with that end in mind to realize that the value of your franchisee is not the initial franchise fee. It is what they are going to produce for you long term, not just in revenue, but also in the way they're going to support your culture and your other franchisees as they also are growing and building their businesses.
It's a great way. I mean, it's the right way to look at it, right? If you're organically growing your business and you're not franchising, you're looking at number of locations, top line gross revenue, and profitability. And so as an extension, if you reverse engineer what are going to be those franchisee generated sales, and of course they need to be profitable, then you're building something that has enterprise value. You're not just selling franchises, you're creating enterprise value, you're creating brand value. And to your point, I think industry gets, it gets flipped and people are focused on franchise sales and leads. They're not focused. They should be driven by enterprise value, and that.
Yeah, I just want to, but I want to follow up and kind of repeat something to make sure, because what you said there is one of the most important parts. Franchising is it's a growth strategy. It's investment strategy, because I think of like the customer funded business. I don't know if anybody's ever read that book. Great book. But you think about customer funded business, wanting to grow your business. Franchising is really just that. It's a customer funded business. My franchisees are funding the growth of Preserven. And so if I think about it, like you suggested, like I'm one single corporate location, you would never think of like, go open up a new place in Dallas because I'm going to get a big fat fee. You would think, did I do the market research? Do I have the right management team? Do I have the right inventory in this market? You would really dive into that area before you would go start a new location in that area. And that is something that definitely we have pivoted to. We really, when we're evaluating franchisees, we're evaluating the person, but we're evaluating the market. And I will clearly say sometimes that like, we don't have any goals to grow into that market. It's not ideal for us. We've looked at it. We've looked at the numbers. We know that given our model and the type of business we operate and the types of services that we do. And I'll say it today, and I don't think it'll ever come back and bite me here. It's like, I don't see the day that we're going to be a Roswell, New Mexico franchise or a Phoenix, Arizona franchise, unless we add something else or change something about our model, because the conditions for the services that we provide just don't exist there. And so we have to be comfortable of like, Phoenix is a hot market, man. I get so many territory checks for it, but we know it's not right for the business. And not even not right for the franchisee, just not right for the business as a whole.
And tied to that, earlier you mentioned capital and capacity, right? Which again, if we're reverse engineering the franchise model, right? We're not starting with, do we like the person? Do they have the money but capital and capacity, not just to buy the franchise, but to drive the growth. And I guess lessons there, or the point is, if they don't have that capital and capacity, you're really losing traction. You're going to be wasting time. You're not creating enterprise value. You're creating a detour.
Yeah. Because I'm going to get ready to open up a store, if you will. You think about it like that. I'm going to open up a store in another city. And if that store doesn't have the right leadership and it doesn't have the right capital to build and grow, then, if this was a corporate location, I would shut it down. If it wasn't profitable and if it was draining and whatever, I could shut it down because it's a corporate location. But as a franchise, I can't, I got a 10-year franchise agreement. I've got all these legal reporting things I would have to do if I decided to shut it down. So the risk of it is so much higher for our model than if I was just a corporate location opening up a satellite or something. So you have to take it a lot more seriously. And that's why you cannot really focus on how many franchises you can add. You have to focus on where you're adding them and who you're adding them with.
Yeah. And then it's not a coincidence when we see brands growing at a strategic level. If you look over 2-3 year time horizon, they may look like a slow growth company, but then you look over a 5-7 year time horizon, you're like, oh, they're a hyper growth company, but no one sees so for Preserven, and this is, I won't say a delicate point, it's a very subtle point, and I'm reflecting on parts of your journey. When people are focused, franchise brands, franchisors, brand story, how they're positioning their brand and all this other stuff, there's a difference between just filling in the blanks versus a very genuine moment. And, one of the things that always impressed me is, we could talk about your brand story and why you started Preserven, but that story also connects with the economics, right? Which is, bigger general contracting or broader spectrum services to a more controllable model, lower cost, maybe, a quote unquote man in a van or woman in a van type thing. And, scalability built in. And I think it would be, if people were evaluating Preserven, I think there's so many other brands that start off, but they have this fatal flaw, which is they don't understand the economics of their brand. So talk about that a little, Ty, because I love how you founded Preserven, right? What was the need you felt for yourself? And then years later now, how does that influence the economic positioning and story?
Yeah, well, you kind of spoke to some of this. So grew up in a family that did home building and construction, kind of followed in the footsteps, built my own construction company, and built what many people call big construction, commercial construction, large scale projects, 6-figure projects. And there's two things. Like, one is that I decided, like, Preserven wasn't built to franchise. Preserven was built for my lifestyle. As I thought about, having those conversations with my family, those conversations with my spouse, business partners, thinking about like what kind of life and what kind of business do we want to have, and then looping in, thinking about the labor pool out there. That was another big part of this, and is maintained to be a big part of this, is thinking about who we're having working inside of our business and thinking about the limitations of the labor, pay, all those things. And really, we looked at this whole thing and said, hey, we want to reverse engineer a business we actually want to own. And part of that was like impact and making a difference in our community. There's that kind of altruistic part of it. But the other part of it was like, can I own a business where I don't have as much stress? And I say this, I've used this, I think this is, I stole this from Tommy Mello, but revenues for vanity, profits for sanity. Can I run a business where I'm not focused on the top line number? I'm in a bottom line number. And so, that was a huge change for me. And of course I had this vision, like I think everybody else, or anybody else like me that is in this space that wants more control of their time, more control over the impact they're making in their communities. And then also wants to run a profitable business that has some legacy opportunity for sale or growth. That there's that too. And so yeah, Preserven, it is part of our brand story because it was, we began with the end in mind. Like we wanted something for us because I knew people would ask me about my other construction business. They would see post on social media and my other YouTube channel that had several thousand followers, and they say, "Oh, I want to do a business like you." And I'd be like, "No, you do not. You don't want my headache. You don't want my overhead. You don't want my payroll. You don't want my insurance cost. Like you don't want any part of this business." And I kind of got to a point where I wanted to but I realized that there was this like really deep need amongst my friends and connections that like people wanted business and they wanted the right path. And it was like, okay, we can re-engineer this and then maybe others can follow in the path, but they couldn't follow in the old path because it was miserable and I wouldn't wish that on my enemies.
And Ty, so that foundation, right? Building the you built the economic, the brand around the economic model, right? And again, it's about driving profits and it's not about driving revenue, which is critical, right? Because some franchisors, they focus on what's our top line sales versus what's the franchisee cash flow. What's the effect of that? Well, getting into specific numbers, but what are the types of conversations franchisee candidates are having when they're considering a Preserven, one? And two, what are some of the economic stories you're having with your franchisees without going into numbers, but like, what are those moments you're proud of when you have those conversations?
Yeah. Well, the things that I am proud of, mostly is that, and it's not because, we're so smart. It is a lot of, because we just gone through so much pain and we kind of re-engineered this. But when I'm working with candidates and then those candidates are becoming franchise owners, the things I'm most proud of is when we have one that comes to mind where you take somebody who had a passion to start a business, but didn't have a pathway at the time, right? Like spent most of her time being a stay-at-home mom while her children were going to school. As she's getting in her 40s, they don't need her as much. She's thinking about like what's next for me. And what I'm most proud of is not only having a pathway for what's next, that's really exciting, but having a pathway that person can be successful beyond their expectations and honestly beyond my expectations. And I don't want to underplay how proud I am of this person, but definitely didn't think that was possible. But it is just this proof of concept that, and it's not just Preserven. I think that this person could have been successful in many other franchise organizations, but it's being a part of that journey. And then looking at their revenue, and even better, looking at their profit and seeing like that they've moved a next level in their thinking about money, and they're thinking about their future. And that's an exciting journey to go on with somebody. And we have a number of different stories that are like that. But it is one of the things we have stayed. And, as a franchisor, we make royalties. Royalties are off the top line revenue. And sometimes it feels like we're cutting our nose to spite our face, but we drive at profit, not revenue with our franchises. And honestly, I always believe that if they get the profit, the revenue will come.
Ty, for new franchisors or people thinking about franchising, and of course there's different industries, focusing on the economic model and are you ready? Should you even franchise? What's your advice?
Man, so my advice outside of what we've talked about a lot here, which is focus on your unit economics of your actual location, your prototype, or what have you, is then to understand the business model of franchising. I think that's a lot more complex. In all of my conversations with franchise experts that could, you talk about them, right? The people who can take your business and give you an FDD and, all that stuff, right? Not a single one of them ever sent me over a pro forma. Not a single one of them ever sent me over a pro forma of what is the business model of franchising. Like, how many franchises do I need? How many trucks on the road do I need? What kind of, allowing me to play with royalty numbers and different things. And like, nobody ever sent me that. And honestly, if anybody ever wants one, I've got one. So, you can ask me for it. I'll send it to you if I'm on LinkedIn. But I felt like I had to go build one. And because to me, it just blew my mind that these people were like, give me $100,000 and I'll franchise your business. Right. Without ever asking me to fill out a pro forma about how this $100,000 was going to work. And then even if I did find success, honestly, without knowing your numbers, like if we would have, without doing that hard work, I always believed Preservan was going to be a success. But if we had sold what we sold without understanding our numbers before we went into it, we would have been seriously underprepared, very undercapitalized. And our franchisees that we had, as we were going through those early growing pains with right fit, wrong fit franchisees, we wouldn't have been able to sustain those first few years as we were doing what you call seasoning the franchise because we didn't understand the numbers. We also had no idea. We wouldn't have known where we were going and when we were going to get, to be able to take a little bit of a breath. So that was critical. I think you got to know your numbers. I don't, and I it has blown my mind. I've sat across from many aspiring and early stage franchisors to see how many of them have not done a pro forma, and how many of you would want a franchisee to join your franchise system without of running a pro forma. The SBA is going to require a pro forma. You should at least require them, whether or not you require them to do it and show it to you, you should at least require that they've done one because you need to know that they know how much money it's going to take to run this business. And the number of franchisors I've met and interacted with that haven't done that, how do you know that franchise fee is enough? How do you know, or too much? Or how do you know the royalty is the right number? How do you even know any of these things?
Ty, it's a big topic, right? So on social, to your point, I've come across a franchisor active on social, not a client, of course, I'm not going to mention the brand. And the person is trying to sell franchises and is sharing their parts of 4 different broker groups. They're doing all of these things, and their primary goal is we want to sell a franchise, right? Mm-hmm. And whether they have or haven't, or why they haven't achieved the results, but I think it has to do with a lot of they're selling the fun part or the good part of the brand, but they're not answering the economic question of where this fits into your life economically.
Yeah.
Right. And we talk about, lifestyle, supplemental income. So they didn't answer that. But what honestly almost like struck fear in me, I looked at their website and they have a low royalty structure, which I guess consultants advise do this, have these lower fees or fixed fees, whatever it is. I won't get into specifics, but I'm like, oh my God, like you may be lucky that you haven't sold franchises because I don't know how you get to profitability as a franchisor.
Yeah.
And no one is having this conversation.
No. And you see things, and this is where, like, I love LinkedIn and I love to participate in LinkedIn as a franchisor,
right, yeah,
but you have to be careful. You have to be careful because there's some really exciting people out there to follow that have gone from 0 to 100 fast, and you'll see what they're doing. You even see what I'm doing, but because there's not a conversation happening about like how How much equity did you give up? How much investment did you take? How much did you take out of your personal set? Like, what all did this person do to do that? And I think that too many people go like, hey, I'm starting a home service business. My home service business is a lot like this other home service business. So I look at their FDD and I see that it's this royalty and this fee and this fee and this fee and this initial franchise fee. And I go, okay, like, and then I feel like that's like, it's a copy of a copy of a copy. And before you know it, nobody knows whether or not 5%, 6%, or 10% royalties is the right number. Everybody just was like, well, this one did it, so I'm going to do it. And like, that's not, and if you kind of go back to the business that you've built that you're trying to franchise, it's not how you make decisions in your business that you currently exist. People say all the time, you're starting a new business and, when you're becoming a franchisor. And that is very true. And that has been my feelings, but don't throw out all of your experience that you got from your other business. If you're able to franchise your business, you have a lot of business acumen, you have a lot of knowledge. Don't just throw it all out because some franchise expert tells you you don't know anything about franchising because you've never franchised. What you do know about is business, and you need to make sure that franchising your business makes business sense, financial sense, and you're, once again, properly capitalized, because it is not a cheap thing to do. It is definitely not. I look back, if this was about getting rich, there's way better ways to get rich than franchising your business.
Well, there are. When it works well, it works, right? In a big way. But it's always the small things. It's always the little things that you think are, the things that create the biggest movement and momentum are the small things. So if you're franchising your business or you're a franchise brand, no matter what size, what does the economics look like right now for your franchisees? Their profitability, their sales growth. At the franchisor level, what is the game plan? What is that 5-year roadmap? When do you get to royalty sufficiency? What does that even look like? And to your point, Ty, if you create your own pro forma, I have X number of franchisees performing at Y level. What does their profitability look like after royalties and other items? What does the revenue look like to us in terms of royalties and maybe supply chain? And what is it going to take for us to properly support those franchisees and help them grow and innovate, right?
Yeah.
And too many are stuck on the sales part. No one gets past it. You could sell 10 franchises and think this is great, but the economics may not work. And that's where it gets very scary for me.
Yeah. It sucks. Like doing pro formas suck. It's not my thing. Maybe if you're an aspiring franchisor, it's your thing. But and what sucks even more about being a franchise is that you have to do two, right? You have to kind of pro forma out your existing business, and then you've got to kind of build out. Well, like, what does it look like? And not what if my existing business was more successful, but what if they're only 80% as successful as I am? Or what about ones that are 50% as successful as I am? So you have to build out pro formas for your concept, right? For your concept. And then you have to funnel that stuff up into a larger pro forma of how you as a franchisor are going to be successful. And then understanding, like, when do I get to royalty sufficiency? When can I take a breath? And then and I don't even know if we have time to get into this. And then the difference between supporting your franchise system and supporting your development strategy, that's a whole nother thing, because there's royalty sufficiency and like me supporting my franchisees pays for itself. But then there's the development side of onboarding new franchisees and getting new franchisees. And, there's so many people who want to get in your pocket on that thing. And before you know it, you could have given up all of your initial franchise fees and not have any money for that. And, if you haven't pro forma'd out that FSO, if you haven't pro forma'd out that marketing company, that PR company, if you haven't pro forma'd that stuff out, how do you even know if you can afford it? You're going to have some hard conversations where you're like, well, that's just not in my numbers. Or I got to raise my initial franchise fee or something, or you got to go really, really fast so you can get enough franchises to cover it, but then you got to build up staff and you got to have capital to do that. So it's a very, very complex thing, and you could do it, but you got to know your numbers.
Ty, I think that's a critical point. So if you look at allocating capital and investing in your franchise system, your franchisees, and then the other component, how much capital you're investing in franchise sales / development. And again, to your earlier point, the model's reversed, right? People will go spend money to go to an expo, to a meetup, to a broker event, to this, that. I'm not saying not to do that, but imagine if you took some of those dollars and said, I can't afford to spend it at this because I need to spend this on the franchisee side because we're going to drive revenue and drive profitability, which ironically, when you improve those unit economics, the brokers and sales are going to come in, right? So it's reversed.
Yeah. One of the things that we did in 2025, and it was somewhat intentional. We had for us, we had a big year in 2024. We awarded a lot of franchises. We doubled the size of our organization in our second year. And it was really exciting, but we knew for 2025, we had a lot of people who were coming on board and they were fixing to go through their first, peak season home service, spring, summer, fall. We had a lot of people coming on board that had never done this before. And we thought we can go get more franchises. And we're limited in resources. I mean, resources are always finite depending on your organization. So we're like, we can go get more franchises, or we can not completely pause development, but we can pull back a little bit from development and put our primary focus in making sure that we can get some of these franchisees having just kick-ass years. So we can say, look what this location did in year 2, or look what this location did in year 1. And we kind of put all of our eggs in that basket. And yeah, I passed on a few conferences, I was a member of a few broker networks, and I only went to one broker conference the entire year. And it was the right decision, because I really just needed to focus with our limited resources and time. I just need to focus on the Z's that we had to get them open, get them strong. And now where we set in 2026 is, we look back and we're kind of excited to get our 2026 FDD wrapped up and get it out, because I know we got strong item 19 numbers that are going to position now us to really have a strong development growth year in 2026 and then beyond in 2027. So the other thing about franchising, as I think I've just rolled out there, is I think that for a franchisor, you're coming out of a business, at least my business, my home service business. I thought a lot about like 6 months ahead. It was a lot of like 6-month strategy. Like right now, a home service business owner, I'm thinking about the spring. And the spring, I'm thinking about the fall. And then the fall, I'm thinking about the winter. I don't really have to look that far out ahead, strategic planning wise. 90 days, 120 days at most. But in franchising, it's a whole, that is one thing that I had to learn. My whole mindset had to shift to start, like, I now do things for a result in 2027 or 2028, which has been a big change for me coming out of, that is one of those places where you're in a whole different business, because you're thinking about getting somebody open, ramping them up, and then they're gonna after that, they're gonna have their first full calendar year, which they'll report in their item 19. And so we've got Preservan Charleston coming on, and they'll start their training the end of March. I want them to have an awesome year, but their first year of reporting is 2027. And so I've got myself on a timeline of a runway to like get them up and going so they can have just an amazing 2027. And so right now I'm thinking about how do I make my FDD, my item 19 even better in 27 and then in 28, because what I do today makes those changes 12 months, 18 months from now.
Before we hit record, right, we were talking about some good moments. You're telling me some internal moments with some, pretty remarkable franchisees. I mean, ironically, in 2026, by hitting pause and going to less conferences and meeting less brokers and spending less money in the industry, ironically, you're in a stronger position to sell with brokers and through the
Yeah.
industry in 2026 than you would have been otherwise. And I think that's such an amazing lesson, and it's genuine, right? So when you're talking item 19, and Preservan has a pretty robust item 19, very, answering the questions that are consistent with the economic story, but you're honoring your economic obligation to your franchisees. So better than having a conversation with a broker and a drink at a bar, than supporting your franchisee, which is going to drive the results. And it sounds simple, but I guess nothing's simple, but it is simple if your economic model is right. Which it's do not franchise if your economic model is not right. There could be 10 other competitors in your industry. You can be the standout. It's not going to be a flashy thing or sponsoring a flashy event. It's the numbers. And go for the slow growth, because over a bigger time horizon, it's the fast growth, right? And we know some amazing brands doing that.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, I tell my franchisees all the time when they're here in Oklahoma City, I give them kind of two pieces of advice. One, I have these photos, and it's all of my failures. And so I kind of like just show them all of my things that look like they were successes on the outside, but truly they were failures. I know how much money I lost at these jobs or what have you. And so I show them that. And the other thing, so I could tell them, like, it's okay to fail. That's how we're going to succeed. The other thing I tell them is first right, then fast. First right, then fast. And I think that's business advice I was given at some point in time, or maybe some woodworking advice or framing advice my dad gave me. But first right, then fast. And I think it works in franchising your business. Focus on getting it right at the unit level economics of your franchisees. Once you get that figured out, then it's really easy to turn the growth engine on. When you focus on the fundamentals, you get it right first.
What's your favorite failure photo?
My favorite failure photo. So it's a picture. If you don't know this about me, I was on HGTV. And
I didn't know that, Ty.
Yeah, I was on HGTV.
I didn't know that.
It was a really cool thing. They called me up. They liked that I had a beard, and they came out to Oklahoma, and we did a pilot episode. It was called Revive and Restore or something like that.
You drive down these historical streets, and so many houses are renovating.
The opportunity for a restoration team like us is incredible.
Ty is a can-do craftsman.
I'm a restoration junkie. I'd hate to see that go away.
Hats off to history, but how can I bring it to the 21st century? And now, the kitchen.
I love it.
You know, I want to hold the timeless things that are already here, and you want to bring in the new timeless things that exist in design.
Yeah, bringing all that together is what makes us an amazing team. Boom.
I gave up so much of my time for this. Like I went all in. I gave up so much of my time. It paid me next to nothing. And I signed a contract that if they would have accepted it, it would have paid me even less than I got paid to do the first one. It'd have been a total just waste of time. But I had this experience. And also on the outside, I'm getting some local PR for it. And people you've been on TV. And I'm I got my 22 minutes on a Sunday afternoon between an episode of Hometown and Fixer Upper that I think only the watch party at my house saw. And then people always ask me, well, what happened with the show? And I got to tell them I failed. It didn't work for a number of different reasons. But that failure taught me so much about production level, working with that company to see how they get things done, how fast they get things done, how they kept me energized. It transformed my management strategy and transformed my business. So huge failure from you were on TV and it didn't work, but big success personally. And my wife was happier that I didn't end up on TV because it was so much friggin' work.
I think our next LinkedIn post will be Ty's a failure. But Ty, episode 5, you definitely have to. When we start episode 5, we're going to start with that photo. Ty, I had no idea. Now I love it. I love it even more. Ty, so as we wrap up episode 4 here, economics, financial truths, I'm going to let you take it out. Any last comments? I'm
going to stick with one I just said. First right, then fast. Know your numbers. Make sure they're right. Make sure the numbers at each level, the unit economics of your franchisee, your prototype, and then the numbers of a franchisor. If you want not a great spreadsheet, but one that I have built and used, hit me up on LinkedIn for it. But first right, then fast.
Ty, I love it. Guys, episode 4, episode 5 coming up next.